Welcome to the Wings Over New Zealand show with Dave Homewood.
Wings Over New Zealand 354, Maximum Effort. A special Wings Over New Zealand show presentation. If you have not yet viewed the original Maximum Effort film, click the YouTube link in the notes. Watch the film and then return to this presentation. If you're listening to the audio podcast version, we highly recommend that you go to the YouTube version and watch this visually. There are lots of photographs and video footage, and also photos that I've colourised.
Welcome to the Wings Over New Zealand show. I'm your host, Dave Homewood, and I'd like to welcome two guests today. We've got Don Simms. Hi, Don.
Hey, Dave. Chris.
And we've got Chris Newey. Hi, Chris.
Hi, Dave. Hi, Don.
So today we're going to be talking about Maximum Effort, which was a film made in 1944, came out in 1945, and is rather interesting in that it covers a crew of a number 75 Squadron Lancaster bomber, filmed at RAF Mepal in Cambridgeshire, and they were an actual crew. They had served together in 75 Squadron, and this film was made at the end of their tour. And there were a few others who also are involved in the film. We'll get to that as we go along, but I think we should start off by introducing who the actual members of the crew were and who you see in the film. So the pilot, his name was Eric Whiting, DFC. He was RNZF. William Edwin Ted Anderson. So Ted is the navigator and he narrates the film, and he also had a DFC. The wireless operator is Glenn Marshall. He was RNZF as well, and he was the Maori member of the crew. And the fourth member of the RNZF was Joseph Collins, known as Joe. He was the rear gunner. And there were two Brits on the crew, Reg Gunn, who was the flight engineer, and the other Brit was Jack Thomas, who was English. And then there's the mid-upper gunner, who was William Campbell, who was known as Jerry. He was Royal Canadian Air Force. So it's a bit of a mixed crew, as often happened. And I don't think I mentioned that Jack Thomas was the air bomber, so he's the bomb aimer, or bombardier, as the Americans would call it. So that was the crew of 7 on board this Lancaster, and the Avro Lancaster was ND 752, known as AAO, O for oboe. Also in the film we see he's only referred to as Roy, the sergeant in charge of the ground crew, and he's a Kiwi. He was Royden Burkett. And we also see a ground crew member who I assume was probably British, called Curly, a bald chap, and we don't know what his name is. Do you guys know what his name was?
No, I don't. And that's Curly up on the photo cleaning the windscreen in that photo.
Yeah, the photo behind me.
Yeah,
you can see his bald head there. And of course, that bald head is actually involved in the film. They call him the mascot, and as they climb aboard their aircraft, they get him to take his hat off, and they all pat him on the head as they get in, as a form of good luck.
Come on, Curly, unveil the mascot.
Lovely, eh, Shirley?
Which is a really interesting thing, because it's probably based on what they really did as a crew. I'm not sure if it's true, but it certainly shows those lucky charms and sort of lucky regimes that air crews had. They had to make sure they did something before they went, otherwise, they might end up with some bad luck. We also see the brand new boss on the squadron. He rolls up in his Jeep, and that is Jack Leslie, Wing Commander Roy John Alexander Leslie, DSO AFC, mentioned in dispatches.
Here comes the Winko. Well, everything okay, folks? Hang on, sir. Good. Well, get a picture tonight for a change. Sure thing, sir. Okay, well, best of luck. So long.
He was a Kiwi in the RAF, and then he actually transferred over to the Royal New Zealand Air Force later in the war. So yeah, he's another character in this film. And I should mention from the outset that the captain of the aircraft, Eric Whitting, he was your great uncle, Don.
Yeah, that's right. That's how I fit into the story, I guess. I don't know if you can see very well over my shoulder there, but I've just propped up a few trinkets of mine that were Eric's or of him, including a photo of him and his brevet wings there. There's a cigarette case as well, which I believe he carried on all of his missions.
Wow.
His pilot's notes from the Lancaster as well. So, and
Fantastic.
he's handwritten in there the serial number of the aircraft, ND792. So yeah, it's all nice little personal trinkets to have of him and the connection to him. And then I also served on 75 Squadron back in the late 90s. So that's the skyhawk picture on the wall was my presentation when I left the squadron in 2000. So it was nice to be following in his footsteps. And by the time I got to 75, unfortunately, Eric had passed away, but he certainly followed my Air Force career with interest.
Right. So the film itself, it was made by the Ministry of Information. I guess they commissioned it. So that would make it an actual British film. It doesn't seem to be a New Zealand film, which I used to think it was a New Zealand film. But it's the Ministry of Information and made, according to the credits, by Merlin Film Company. According to the operation record book of the squadron, the director, Michael Hankinson, was from Spectator Short Films. So I guess whether they just made up the Merlin film company around this this production or what it was. There's very little information whatsoever on this film online in terms of from the film angle. I did try and do a bit of research. Michael Hankinson directed several wartime short documentaries. He seemed to have been a documentary maker, but his IMDb page doesn't even mention this film, which is a bit of a shame. And it was written, according to the credits, it was Arnott or Arno Robertson. And I just assumed, okay, that was some bloke. And looking that up, I think it's actually a female novelist and screenwriter who was often credited as Arnott Robinson, Eileen Arnott Robertson. So that was quite interesting. She wrote quite a few novels and had a few of them made into films. So it's got to be the same person. She was in the same time frame and all that sort of thing. So the script, which it is scripted, even though it's all real people, she wrote that by the look of things. I don't know if you guys know anything about her.
No, that's interesting. That's news to me.
No, don't know. Didn't know that, Dave.
Okay. And the film opens at Mepal, and the voiceover by Ted Anderson, the navigator. He states, this is a bit of New Zealand, 11,000 miles from you folks at home. So it was obviously, even though a British film, it was directed at New Zealanders. And I just found that interesting that a navigator would say 11,000 miles from home, because the usual thing that you would ever hear is that Britain was 12,000 miles from New Zealand. So I don't know what's going on there. So in terms of making the film, tell me about how the crew ended up there, Don, and tell me about that crew, what they'd done up until this point.
Well, the crew that's in the film, most sort of the core 5 crew members went right from 11 OTU where they crewed up, and then that was on Wellington, so the crew was only 5 members at that stage. And then when they went to the heavy conversion unit and started flying Stirlings, they got another 2 crew members. And at that stage, the rear gunner was Sergeant Walter Herndl from Fielding. And during their time on 75 Squadron Flying Sterlings on one of the early missions in December 43, doing gardening mining ops. They were attacked by a night fighter, and Walter Herndl was killed in that attack. So after that they obviously got a new rear gunner. And looking at the operational record book, they'd had several different rear gunners sort of over the rest of their time on Sterlings and Lancasters.
Okay.
And the mid-upper gunner also changed as well. But the rest of the crew was the original crew from when they first crewed up at 11 OTU.
So they were, when they're on Sterlings, were they based at Newmarket?
No, they're at Mepal on Sterlings, yeah.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah.
So this film really came just at the point where they'd only just sort of converted over to Lancasters, wouldn't it?
Yeah, they did most of their tour on Sterlings, and then they flew. Was it Chris the last 8?
8, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, of their tour was on the Lancaster. This Lancaster in the film, and they'd just completed their last mission together on the 27th of May, and the film crew sort of turned up to start the filming on the 30th by the look of it.
Okay.
So I had heard through talking to some of the old Bomber Command 75 veterans, including Ron Mayhall, when I talked to him at a reunion many years ago, because his crew did some of the filming as well, and he mentioned that they initially were going to use a crew that was sort of mid-tour, but they kept getting shot down. So whether that was true or not, and they decided they'd better wait until a crew finished, and then they would use that crew so they wouldn't lose them halfway through it.
Right. Right.
But that was what Ron told me at the time.
I mean, that's probably quite likely true because, again, that happened with Memphis Belle. They were following several crews making that documentary, hoping to get the first to 25 missions, and they lost a couple of crews in that process. So, it's a bit unpredictable.
And at the time, when they finished the tour, Eric was B Flight Commander, so he, looking at logbooks for each month, the flight commander would sign off each crew member's logbooks. Eric was still signing off logbooks sort of into June, even July. I think I've seen one. So officially, he was posted off squadron in June to the Lancaster finishing school where he was going to instruct on Lancasters, but he appears to still be doing some work at 75 Squadron as a flight commander, even in that period where he's supposed to have left, but not 100% sure when he did leave the squadron. And because the crew had sort of dispersed, and the film crew must have needed a bit more footage, and that was where they had to get another crew to fly the aircraft and just complete some of the last of the filming sequences, air-to-air shots that they needed. But they must have captured all of the shots of the crew at their workstations and all of the audio that goes with them, because there's quite a bit of the crew actually speaking in the film. So they must have done that first before they all dispersed to their next postings.
Yeah.
And then obviously Ted Anderson narrates the whole thing. Yeah, we don't know when he did that, but possibly after he came back to New Zealand. Just because the film didn't get released until 1945, that was the first time it was screened in New Zealand. And by that stage, Ted was back in New Zealand about February 45, and Eric was as well. And there's even some footage of New Zealand scenes where Ted's fly fishing on a river.
Funny the things that come into your head. I always think about the Otahuhu River. Helps me to feel I'll be back there someday, I suppose.
Which to me does look like a South Island river. Doesn't look like somewhere in the UK. So it's possible they did some filming back in New Zealand in early 45 after they got back, and then the narration was done, and then the film was eventually finished and released. Yeah, there's a few gaps in our knowledge there, but we're trying to piece it together bit by bit. Yeah, and really this over the last week when we've been talking about doing this, I've sort of learned a lot more, and I've gone back and reread some of the material I've got. So I've got some letters that Ted Anderson had written to Walter Herndl's niece, in the early 2000s, just talking about the time on the squadron, and I sort of relearnt a few things I'd forgotten, and trying to piece together that timeline of when the film came out, and those newspaper clippings sort of advertising the films, showing it was after VE Day, so the war had ended in Europe, and the film was shown, and then, which is kind of interesting because it looks like it was made to be shown during the war, just the way it's scripted, but perhaps just with people moving on, and they didn't get the narration done until after Ted got back to New Zealand, perhaps, and then it took a while to produce it and then get it out.
It is strange because it's over a year before it comes out. I just wonder why that would have been. But tell me a little bit about Chris, about the history of that Lancaster ND 752. I think you know a little bit about that, don't you?
Yeah, she was one of the very first to arrive on the squadron, 13th of March, one of the very first ones. And they'd flown her since she arrived, so they must have been allocated her or chosen her straight away. So it was their plan until they finished their tour. And
those pickup shots that were done by, I think it was the Aitken crew, with Ron Mayhew aboard, they were in the same aircraft, weren't they? They were flying the same.
Yes, yeah. There's a number of publicity stills that were taken at the same time that have survived. Yeah, so it's definitely ND 752 that did all the filming.
I find it really interesting that the film kind of started being made only a few days before D-Day. The squadron would have been very, very busy over D-Day, over that whole period. And there is evidence that an AAO marked aircraft landed. It was the first Lancaster to land in Europe. That was a 75 Squadron Lancaster, but it was a different AAO. So did they keep 752 out of operations just for the film and have another one that was on operations, or?
No, that was JNO. And in that newspaper article that I sent through, Nick Williamson mentions that he was the pilot of JNO, which was the first Lancaster to land in Europe after D-Day. He called it Orange, and whereas this AAO they refer to as Oboe.
Right, so that makes sense.
Two separate aircraft, and in fact, in the taxiing sequence in the movie, which supposedly, according to that newspaper article, was shot in a takeoff for an op against Cagny in France, which takes it out to something like the 18th of July. You can see a Lancaster taxi past, which I always hopefully thought was JND, but I think it is JNO, which is the orange that Nick Williamson talks about featuring in the film. So you see it taxi past the camera, getting ready to take off.
Okay, interesting. I completely have forgotten
about. It does appear they filmed over quite a period.
Yeah, the cameraman must have just been turning up at random times. He wouldn't have been there the whole time. But that's interesting. And there's actual shots where the camera's on board a Lancaster, and obviously there's all the crew shots, which were probably filmed on the ground with the tail up on a trestle or something like that, I would imagine, just to make it easier for the camera crew. But there are a few shots where it's definitely a flying Lancaster, and you do see an operational raid on a city, which could all be stock footage, I guess. It's just,
I think it is. I've seen a lot of that footage previously in other films and documentaries. I think it's just their stock mission footage. There's a silhouette of a bomber below, which looks like a Halifax. It doesn't look like a Lancaster. And some of the flak traces coming up, flashing past, is kind of interesting.
Looks like somebody scratched the negative.
But there's obviously a bit of stock footage in there. It's like the New Zealand scenery photos and that when they talk about the individual crew members and where they came from in New Zealand, then there's sort of a little bit of background footage to some of them, like up for Glen Marshall around the Wairoa, Gisborne area. And obviously that was filmed in New Zealand at some point, whether that was just stock footage that they used as well.
Yeah, or perhaps they just got the New Zealand Film Unit or whatever to just go and do some pickup shots or whatever for them, second unit. But yeah, realistically, those shots that were about his life were really just a group of Maoris singing.
They were just probably tourism film or something. Yeah.
Exactly. It could have been done anywhere in New Zealand. So, but I mean, there's a bit of humour in the film too. Like at the beginning, while they're waiting to go, and it's obviously a hot day, and Eric says, all I ask is to get out of this clobber and have a swim, and Joe quips, maybe you'll have to before the night's out. And I mean, that's a bit of dark humour from the typical RAF humour there.
All I ask is to get out of this clobber and have a swim. Maybe you'll have to before the night's out.
I think think about that. He's talking about going down the channel.
Yeah, it was interesting that when they were talking about the individual crew members in that scene, and the Canadians, obviously a bit of a ladies' man as well, and it's like that was quite risque, I thought, but probably how they were.
Well, it's easy to guess what Jerry's thinking about.
Yeah, and the bit about his life was dancing girls.
Yeah.
On stage. I mean,
it was interesting from what I know of, like Eric and Ted Anderson, what they talked about, their interests, and what they talk about was exactly what they were like. Eric was always into politics, and that was what they said. He talked constantly about politics. And then the National Party follower, member, very right wing, and talked a lot of politics, and that's what he talked in the film. Ted Anderson, loved his fishing and fly fishing, so that was all true. It appears. Yeah, we talked about the rear gunner and the telegram, and talking about his wife being killed.
And Joe, well, there's only one thing in his mind. It's been there ever since the day he got that cable from home. She was a volunteer for a special job in an explosive factory. She died a couple of days later.
Now, whether that's true or not, because we haven't been able to collaborate that with any ammunition bomb explosion back in New Zealand. But that might just be a bit of director's license, or it could be true she did pass away while he was overseas, and they've just sort of fluffed it up a bit to make it try and fit in with the storyline. But Jack Marshall's baby being born, christening, I believe that was all true. They were, they all went to each other's weddings and things like that. So
I love that they call him the gremlin, the baby.
Yeah.
But that whole thing with Joe's wife, if it wasn't true, that would be such a horrible thing for his and her family to be watching back home, talking about her being killed in an accident.
Movies. That's why I wonder if there was some truth in it.
Maybe
she was killed in an accident, but they've just
the telegram that they show on screen is addressed to a Sergeant Connor, not to Collins.
It's
odd.
I did look at the number of sorties that Joe Collins flew as rear gunner, and there was a gap. So I was thinking, if his wife did pass away, he'd probably be taken off ops, so he could go and grieve, because obviously he couldn't come home. But whether that was why he didn't fly for several missions with the crew, there was other rear gunners, and then he came back towards the end. I don't know if that was why, but I was just looked at them yesterday and thought, well, that he does disappear for a few days, like he's been given some time off, maybe.
Talking about the script being written by somebody else, the impression I got listening to the guys going through the sequences in the aircraft, the routines, etc., was that was pretty. It sounded pretty authentic, and so I don't know whether that was scripted or whether scripted in consultation with the aircrew. Maybe.
Yeah, the scriptwriter has to have talked with the aircrew, got some bits and pieces out of their life, and so obviously Glenn did like the dancing girls and all that sort of thing. But I looked into munition factories in New Zealand, and they do say that she was in an accident in a munition factory. There were only 3 that I found, and one was in Auckland, and one in Hamilton, and both of those made rounds, ammunition. And then there was the Ford Motor Company in Lower Hutt were making grenades. And I just wonder, if she's killed in an explosion, it has to have been the grenade factory, but I've never heard of anything.
And Joe came from Christchurch.
Yeah, that's now those women who worked in those factories. I did get a chance to talk to a few of those quite a number of years ago, a couple of them, and they were young girls who had turned 18 and were this is largely they were man-powered, it was called. It was a law that came in about 1942-43 where it basically like the men were being conscripted into the army or other services. The young women were getting man-powered into munitions work. I talked to a lady here in Cambridge who she was sent up to Auckland, and she said they hated it. They absolutely hated it because once those 2 ammunition factories were producing ammunition previously, but once they got the woman in there, all the men stopped doing all the work and just they were very union oriented, and they wouldn't help the woman, and they absolutely hated it. And also they hated the fact that they'd come from small town Cambridgeshire, and there were quite a few girls from Cambridge that got sent up to Auckland or to the Hamilton one. And the ones who went to Auckland, they were just thrust into Auckland life. And apparently there were a lot of American servicemen around that were, hassling them when they'd walk down the street and all this sort of thing. They hated it. So there was just a little bit of extra sideline knowledge there. But there's not a lot really known about those munition factories. The one in Hamilton was in Day Street, and that was still there. All the buildings were still there until only a few years ago, because it became part of the university campus. It became called the Day Street campus, and they've bolted it all now and put a new motorway connection through that. Not a motorway, but a sort of big highway connection right through that land, unfortunately. But there were obviously girls in munition work in New Zealand building, constructing ammunition and grenades. But it's a strange one. That whole story it doesn't seem to gel. It's the only thing that really doesn't seem to gel. So it's a bit puzzling.
And that telegram having a different person's name on it as well. It's a bit odd.
And it's a genuine New Zealand telegram. They, even though it's been filmed, I just wonder if they filmed that later in New Zealand when they were doing those pickup shots, and they just grabbed one, and who knows?
Could well have.
We'll have to find out who Connor was. Was it Connor?
Connor, yeah. Well, they don't mention surnames in the movie, do they? So
no.
Yeah, maybe it was thrown in afterwards for extra colour.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. They never mentioned their surnames because, so that name might have been made up just because the story was made up. So, and the other point I was going to make about that is when they're talking about her having an accident at a munitions factory, you see Wellington bombers being built, and it's like, okay,
yes,
that's definitely not one of our factories. The only aeroplanes that were built in New Zealand in World War II were Tiger Moths. So, strange one, strange. Another thing I found strange too was Jack Leslie when he rolled up, and the CO of the squadron, he rolls up, and as he's leaving after talking with Eric, he says,
well, everything okay, folks? Hang on, sir. Good. Well, Get a picture tonight for a change? Sure thing, sir. Okay, well, best of luck. Hello.
And I was thinking, don't they get a picture every time?
For a change, yeah, was his comment.
Yeah, for a change, yeah. And it's like, they get a picture every time, don't they? It's part of the bomb run.
Well, they were supposed to, but perhaps they hadn't worked or something.
Being sarcastic, being funny, being funny, I think, sarcastic.
Yeah.
The whole
it's interesting,
the CO turning up was
Leslie,
very informal.
Wasn't universally liked in the squadron.
No. In fact, the last episode that I put out of the Wings Over New Zealand show with John DeHoop, he actually talked about that, how he was a press-on guy and, you had to do the job and had no choice and got a lot of people killed there. So, interesting.
Yeah, interesting story I came across with the Ted Ford crew. They didn't have a rear gunner for one trip, so Leslie volunteered to come as rear gunner, flew on the trip, and it got to over the target, and he didn't have anything to shoot at, so he threw all his ammunition out to hoping that it would hit one of the bastards.
Okay. Now, that reminds me of something in the film too. That
actually one little thing in the rear gunner tests his guns.
That's exactly what I was about to say.
On the ground, it shoots into the ground, and I thought, oh, I've never heard of that before.
All hatches closed, rear gunner. All hatches closed.
No.
I
thought they did it in the air, but yeah, he did it on the ground.
I was about to say exactly the same thing. It's crazy. That has to have been something the director came up with.
Yeah.
Yeah, it must have been, because I've never heard of them doing that before. And you imagine if every Lancaster around the airfield's doing that.
Yeah. I mean, they did test their guns, but it was once they're airborne.
I was just going to say about the other New Zealander on the ground crew, Roy Burkett. Interestingly, after the war, and once Eric had got married in New Plymouth and settled back in New Plymouth, he went and worked for Roy. I can't remember what Roy's business was, but Eric actually went and worked for Roy.
Oh wow!
For most of the rest of his working life. Yeah.
That's
and I think in the end they worked for, did quite a few business ventures together and did very well. But yeah, that was a nice. They'd obviously formed a relationship, and Eric was stationed at Bell Block, New Plymouth, after the war for a while, because he stayed in the Air Force for a couple of years after. And then obviously, they decided to get together and work together. So
okay, that's very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Are you aware of whether Reg Gunn, who they said wanted to be a reporter in the newspapers, did he ever get to do that after the war?
Reg Gunn, he stayed in the RAF. Well, he was in the RAF regiment, I think it was, for many years after the war.
Okay.
But yeah, there's certainly information out there on some of the crew and what they did. And I got to meet Ted Anderson in 2009 after I'd moved back to Christchurch. I wondered if he was still alive, because I'd heard the name mentioned, so I'd got an address for where his house was from Eric's wife, who was now a widow. She said, well, this was where they lived in Christchurch. So I drove around, and they said, I know that the bellboy that lived here's gone into a rest home. So eventually I tracked him down. He was in the veteran rest home in Christchurch here. Okay. So I went and saw him a couple of times before he passed away. And yeah, it was really great to talk to him. And like you've done a lot of, Dave and Chris, talking to the veterans. Yeah, just to hear everything in their own words. And I just wish I'd recorded it or, done more of it.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, he settled back in Christchurch. He got married in the UK after their tour in early 1945 in London. Married an English wren. She was in the Navy, and she worked at Bletchley Park. He didn't even know what she did. He knew she was in the Navy, but obviously she couldn't say what she did.
Right.
So she was doing something at Bletchley Park, and it wasn't until after the war that she could tell him. what
Okay.
they actually done during the war. But yeah, they got married in London early 45, and then came back to New Zealand in February 45, and never went back.
Right.
Settled in Christchurch. Yeah.
Okay. I know that you're a keen fisherman, Don. Have you ever been to the river that he mentions, the Opihi River?
I know where it is. Opihi. It's down south of Canterbury because originally Ted came from Timaru, so it's just inland from there, really.
Okay.
Yeah.
You're not fished it though?
Not that river, no. It's quite a small river. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
I've driven across the bridge not many times.
Okay. All right. The film actually gets quite tense when it's coming into the bomb run and they get attacked by a fighter, and the fighter takes out their oxygen system. It does actually get quite tense, and then the skipper says, let's sort of go down to 13,000 and press on anyway.
The diggers cut the pipeline at the back of the buttons. Okay, chaps, only 30 miles to go. Ready to turn back now. What say we go down and bomb from 13,000?
And you can kind of, in what they don't say, you see everything on their faces.
The silence says everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's brilliantly done. It really is.
Yeah, well, by that stage, they had been attacked by night fighters probably several times and were probably well aware of what could happen when you are. And then, there was a bit of press-on-itis perhaps there from Eric, but I'm sure he was that sort of person anyway. He would have, when he's that close to the target, would have said, "Come on, chaps, let's just get this done." Yeah, that was his nature as well. If I'm sure he would have asked the crew probably if it was real though. What shall we do? And instead of just telling them.
Yeah,
would have been highly dangerous.
I was thinking the bomb's coming down.
Yeah.
You get hit by a bomb from above.
Exactly.
So again, it's not quite probably accurate, but yeah.
What did he get his DFC for?
It was just the whole tour. I think it was after he had completed and says what it's for, but it was just general. You've been a good bugger and you did good work. Yeah. And Ted Anderson's the same. Yeah.
Yep. Okay. I like the film that it's got a lot of Air Force language or slangage in it, as they call it. It's got a bit that maybe the general public wouldn't have understood, and they definitely wouldn't understand now. But there's a bit in there. But there's also Kiwi language. There's one point where the mid-upper gunner goes, "She's right," and I was thinking, that's definitely a Kiwiism, and you think about the period where it's being made, and it's being made by a British film company. I think that's quite cool that they sort of kept the colloquialisms in there.
Yeah, and I think the casual nature of the relationships between the different crew members and the ground crew, I think that's real. What you saw, that they all bonded and were all part of a team, and there was no formalities, there was no saluting, there's no yes sir, no sir, because they're all different ranks. Some were officers, some were NCOs. So even when the CO turns up in his car, there was no standing attention and saluting. It was very informal. It was a wave, hello.
Yeah.
Which probably was how it was. Especially between the ground crew and the air crew. I'm sure they had a very close bond. And when aircraft didn't come back, it must have been hellish hard on the ground crew every time that happened. Yeah, because they'd established those connections and relationships, and then they don't come back. Yeah. And next day you get a new aircraft and a new crew.
Yeah, exactly.
We didn't talk about what happened to this particular Lancaster after Eric's crew passed it on to the new crew. Chris, do you want to talk through that? You're probably the best person to talk about that. and also the connection with your MOTAT Lancaster.
Yeah. The MOTAT Lancaster is marked on one side to represent ND752 oboe, as represented as shown in the film, and for quite a while they used to show maximum effort in one of the booths alongside the Lancaster. You could see the movie being on a loop, being shown along with a couple of other Lancaster related movies, but they've stopped doing that, unfortunately. But yeah, the Burt crew had taken over oboe after the Whitting crew was tour expired, and they were given leave. The Aitken crew flew those extra filming sequences, and then they gave it back to the Burt crew, and I think it was 10 days later they were shot down and lost. So yeah, oboe didn't last much longer. Very, very sad.
Right. Wow. That is sad. And the only character that didn't make it through the war, really.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Which is actually quite remarkable when you think about it. Yeah, that's pretty amazing.
And to have the MOTAT Lancaster painted on one side as that aircraft, and when I figured that out eventually, that was actually Eric's aircraft, I thought, oh, well, that's really special.
Yeah.
But, it's the movie, the connection with the movie, and that aircraft.
The crew, yeah.
It's a night, and given what happened to the crew that were lost with it, so it's a memorial, as it should be.
Do you know who it was at MOTAT or within the Bomber Command Association that chose that scheme for the aircraft?
It goes way back to the beginning when they were first talking about building a hangar for the Lancaster and painting it up, etc. And at that stage, they had was it 106 Squadron SR painted on one side, and they decided to put ND752 AAO on the other side. I don't know the exact reason, but yeah, it goes back quite a way when they first started to repaint it as the Bomber Command Lancaster. It was still outside at that stage, so you can see those markings going way back to the 80s.
I think it was 101 Squadron, that SR.
101, okay, yes.
Yeah, 106 was a Mosquito Squadron.
Yes, sorry.
Yeah. So I just wondered if, we probably will never know now, but I wondered if there was somebody involved with the film who was in the Bomber Command Association at the time, or involved at MOTAT or something like that. So because it wasn't readily available back in the 1960s and 70s and 80s. That film, you couldn't just find it anywhere. It was only since
there's a few copies floating around. Roy Burkett had a copy, or his family had a copy, and one of the YouTube versions comes via his family.
Right.
Yeah, they had they had the actual film, and then somebody else had a VHS made of it. I think the Air Force Museum might have produced VHS copies of it. That's probably much later.
Yeah, but it's only really in the VHS and then the YouTube era that it's become more widely known. It would have been forgotten for a long time.
Yeah. Which
makes me wonder, how did somebody at MOTAT or within the Bomber Command Association who were looking after the aircraft know about that particular aircraft?
I could check if Roy Burkett was a member of the association. I can go back to the early membership list and have a look. That come through him.
Yeah.
When did Eric join the Bomber Command Association? Was he
quite
member
possibly.
of that?
I'll have to go back and have a look at the list. I've got full lists going way back. So
I know Eric was in the 75 Squadron Association, but I'm not sure about Bomber Command. He retired to Tauranga.
He probably was in it, yeah. He probably was on that list. There's 550 or something members when they first started up in 1986, I think it was, something like that.
But because the other side of the aircraft that had the 101 Squadron, that was painted after an aircraft by the guy that restored the. He was on 101 Squadron. The team leader, what was his name? Tom. I've forgotten his name now. But I remember Peter Wheeler saying that was his squadron, and so he chose that one. But I'm not sure about the 75. They obviously wanted a 75 Squadron one, but who chose that specific one?
Yeah, I think one of the main guys in the restoration team was it Ken Bolt? He was an ex-75 ground crew.
Okay.
So it could have come through his connections or something.
Yeah.
Right?
Maybe he's curly.
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah. Oh well, it's an interesting film, and I hope that maybe this podcast brings it to a bit of a wider audience once people start to look at it. I hope that they watch the film before they watch this, because it's a great film. It's actually very watchable even after 80 odd years, and it's a nice piece of history in that they captured our real squadron and our real squadron members, our real base, our real station, all that sort of thing. The thing I wonder, if they were there for that long or filming that often through, June, July, how much more footage did they take that never got used, and has any of it survived anyway? That's what I'd like to know.
Yeah.
Well, Ron Mayhill mentions in Bombs on Target that they were also using some footage for another movie, which was called We Fly Together or something. I'd never heard of that, but it may have been renamed. There was a film made called New Zealand Was There, and it contains pieces of the footage from Maximum Effort. And I think from what I've read, the New Zealand government decided very late in the war, very belatedly, that they needed to have a record of the RNZAF's contribution in Europe. And so it was only mid 1944 that they started to make an effort to record these things, and they created a position of archivist at New Zealand RNZAF headquarters in London, and that was Frank Andrews, who'd done 2 tours with 75 Squadron. And so that was only in August 1944 that they started to take it seriously, this idea of putting these things together. And New Zealand Was There apparently came out of that effort, but I've seen it, and it's quite scrappy, and there's a lot of borrowed footage. I don't think there's very much original footage at all in it. Okay. So I think they were just left their run too late with getting these things done.
I think there was.
I have seen the footage from Maximum Effort used in a lot of documentaries.
Yes, later documentaries. I think that there was a film that was made called Journey Together that was an RAF story. I wonder if that might be what Ron was thinking about. But who knows?
That's the other aspect of the footage, is just the general Mepal airfield scenery area and looking around. And the prominent feature in that area, and still is the water tower at Sutton, the village of Sutton. And that, you see that in a lot of photographs and footage in the background. And the first time we went to Mepal and Sutton to have a look, it just stands out. That water tower, such a unique shape, and you can pick a photo up and you can sort of walk around and visualize where you're standing on parts of the old airfield that are still there. So it's always great to see that water tower in any footage or photos, and then you can look at a map and figure out where that was taken from.
Yes,
there are still not many. There's still not a heck of a lot of movie footage around of Lancasters taxiing around the perimeter, and that in those sort of numbers and takeoff sequence, etc. It's still quite valuable record of that stuff.
Yeah,
which is probably why you see it in some of these documentaries, more recent ones, just snippets of the footage from Maximum Effort used.
Yeah. What I was going to say is, I wonder if what you were saying about the British suddenly recognising that New Zealanders should have something recorded, did they do the same? Did the Ministry of Information do the same with the Australians and the Canadians and others that were involved? Have they got equivalent films to Maximum Effort?
I don't know. The stuff that I read was the New Zealand government that was trying to put this together, and there's a newspaper article somewhere which implied that other countries were doing it and we weren't. We were remiss in recording our effort.
Okay, interesting.
So it was a New Zealand-led thing, but maybe they got the Ministry of Information to do it for them. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Oh well.
I'm certainly glad they did. It's a time capsule, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%. Is there anything else that we haven't covered that you guys wanted to mention?
No, I don't think so. I think people just need to probably watch it and they'll pick up some of the stuff we've talked about.
Yes. Yeah, agreed.
And I think every time I watch it, I notice something different. It's a little detail. And if we could get the footage that's better quality, I'm sure there's a lot more detail, particularly of the inside the aircraft and just little bits and pieces like that. It'd be great to get the footage restored and see it in all its glory.
Yeah, and now that I'm familiar with the Motat Lancaster, inside and out, it's fascinating watching that movie again and just tying in with pieces of equipment, etc., like the oxygen system and the fact that there were blast doors right next to that, which we don't have in the Motat Lancaster. And there's been a debate recently about whether we should have blast doors back in there or not, because we think they were originally there. So yeah, it's fascinating.
Right.
A lot we can learn still.
And you mentioned, Chris, when we were planning for this, that the sequence for the start was wrong.
Ready for starting, Ridge. Contact.
Yes, I think it's just the film sequence they've shown incorrectly. They always start with the number 3, which is the starboard inner, and then they go 3, 4, 2, 1. And in the sequence, and actually it shows the port outer starting up first, which is strange. But then they show the number 3, the starboard inner after that. So they maybe just to swap the film around and put it in the wrong sequence.
Yeah. That was an interesting thing that most people wouldn't pick up on.
Yeah, you have to start off the number 3 because that's where the generator is, and they need the ground battery, the trolleyac, to start up the number 3, and then once the generator's running, they can start the other 3 up.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you very much again, gents, and we highly recommend that people go and watch this film if they haven't watched it. I will certainly put the YouTube link into the show notes for this page, and so if you've picked up this episode, off somewhere else, go and search YouTube for 75 Squadron Maximum Effort, and you'll find it. Thanks again.
Come on, Curly, unveil the mascot.